Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Good afternoon, actually. If you feel comfortable to turn on the camera, then we see who is there. Hello, thank you, Emma. Hello, welcome. Hello, Mairéad.
Hello.
Hiya.
Matthew. Nice to see you. For so long.
And you. Long time.
Yeah, indeed. Nice, nice. Welcome. Let's give some minutes people to connect and that they are audio, then they can hear us. So I will let. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Alessandra Antonaci. I'm the program manager of EADTU. Today I'm welcoming you to this last day of the webinar week for Empower. We are taking some minutes to let people join and set their devices in a way that they can hear as well. If you have problem, you don't hear me because you see I'm talking, please write in the chat, then we will try to fix it. If you agree with me, I will give it another minute to let people join the event and then we kick off, we start. From the EADTU team, the European Association of Distance Teaching University, that is the organizer. You are with me also Stefan Meuleman. So
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, welcome. I think most people are in, Alessandra. If anybody's still coming, I'll also let them in the room. But I think we can shortly get started. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. So Stefan, if you could share the agenda, we go through it. Thank you. Okay, so we will start today with guys, you hear I have a very Italian accent. So if I am Italian, if I pronounce wrongly your name, please jump in and teach me how to say. I'm gonna try, and then you tell me if it is wrong. So I would say Mairéad. Is it correct? From Dublin City University will be the first speaker. Emma is easy to say, it's kind of an Italian sound. From the Irish University Association will be our second, and then we finish with the last but not the least, Carles, who is a man, so he should be the last. I'm kidding. That will present, and he comes from the University Oberta de Catalunya. There is time for the presentation, and after the presentation, we will have questions, so don't be shy, turn on your microphone and say your question. If you prefer to type, please do so in the chat. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Mairéad, and let this event start. Thank you.
I'll turn it down. Sorry. How's it going? Is everybody getting their tech sorted? And I'll get the screen up and hopefully everything will run accordingly. So delighted to be asked to be here for the EADTU webinar series, the Empower series on micro-credentials as part of this 3-day session that we've had. And this is what I'm going to talk about today, I presume, is to remove the dial or to push the needle maybe a little bit on some of the research that we've been doing in Dublin City University on taking into account discourses and action related to social value and micro-credentials, and how that we can move this from some of the dominant rhetoric, which is in around business, which is in around neoliberalism, which is in around all of those good things. But we're going to go through that. So to introduce myself, first of all, my name is Dr. Mairéad. I'm Director of Microcredential Strategy and Innovation in Dublin City University and head of our DCU studio. And this paper was written with my co-authors, Cahir McLaughlin, Professor Mark Brown, and Dr. Elaine Byrne. And I suppose lots of you will know that DCU has been very involved with the development of micro-credentials and policy engagement and delivering out micro-credentials. But I think a lot of universities and a lot of HEIs are getting more and more to grips with microcredentials over the last, I'd say 18 months. And it's been interesting to talk to colleagues from across Europe about why they're getting involved. And for me, a lot of the drivers seem to be in and around some of the perspective, individual national initiatives that are going on, but also there's a little bit of fear of missing out and not understanding exactly where the strategic alignment with microcredentials. But I'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm also going to talk about some of the work that we've done in DCU in both the national as and at the European level in our work with the ECI University Alliance. I'll also talk a little bit, but I'll leave it for Emma to do most of the talk on a national initiative we have here in Ireland about microcreds. I want to talk obviously about the state of play of where we're at with microcredentials in Europe and what's been going on. And I know that you'll have had covered lots of that over the last few days, but then also looking at the wider concept of microcredentials and maybe the tension a little bit about some of the employability agenda versus the lifelong or life-wide agenda. So hopefully we'll get through all of that and have time for some good questions closer to the end. So what is a microcredential? Not easy to answer if you look at a lot of the literature on this. Lots of definitions going around, lots of confusion within the literature about what is and what isn't a microcredential. I think a really valuable part of what we've been trying to do in Europe has been setting the scene about microcredentials from a wider context and looking at getting our roadmap together, which I think has been really, really important, and giving ourselves clear steps upon that roadmap about what we can do. And part of that was in the draft recommendation, which was published in June. And I think what the Commission has provided is a broad definition, which allows us to work on and build upon a lot of the EADTU tools that we already have in place from a higher education perspective, so that we can build out microcredentials. But one thing I want to emphasize is we know that microcredentials aren't new. We know that short courses potentially, well, short courses have been around for forever, literally, and this is what, and they have always been there. So from that perspective, the micro aspect of it, I think we know that we have been able to do this. We know that we can do this, but it's also to see what's the integrity, what are the drivers, why are we doing this, I think is one of the questions that needs to be answered. So hopefully I can move down the page. So microcredentials are everywhere. I've obviously just gathered this from, a number of, projects, initiatives, reports, etc. that have come out. And a lot of those you can find on the Microcredential Observatory that we curate in DCU. But there's a huge amount of interest in this sector. It's a week doesn't go by and something doesn't come out, some new initiative, some report, some national policy with respect to microcredentials. So lots of things are going on in this respect. And when you start to drill down and unpack what is being said about microcredentials, there's some interesting things that are coming to the fore. And also there's interesting things from what national agencies and European-wide agencies and even supranational agencies in other jurisdictions are trying to do to manage through this phenomenon, and particularly when the particular emphasis has been on this sort of upskilling, reskilling and targeting of skill development of populations and of citizens across Europe and globally and more widely across the globe. So is it a hype machine? And there's been lots of things written about this. So when you look at a lot of the grey literature, if you do put in a microcredential search, we've done this over a number of periods in DCU when we've been doing our research. We can see that the microcredential, the word came particularly in 2012 was the start of it, and now we can see that exponentially that's grown, the number of search results that you will get on that. Huge amount of actors coming to the fore that want to be involved with microcredentials, that see it in some way as a panacea to rectify lots of woes in and around training and development, etc., and providing a workforce, matching the skills and competencies of a workforce to a more developed workforce, etc. So Other elements that are coming through from that type of literature, as it's perceived and always positioned potentially as promoting flexibility and personalized approaches. Lots of times the depth of those sort of statements is not clarified. The statements aren't padded out or fleshed, but they're more the generic is given. And I think that's one of the areas, particularly in the ECIU University, is that we've been trying to look at and to see, well, let's try and put a bit of substance around what micro-credentials are. I think we know from Reynoldson's critique of micro-credentials, there's been a huge and maybe perhaps overwhelming emphasis on the economic and industry drivers. And this hasn't been balanced out with perhaps some of the more pluralistic and social cohesion drivers that exist that potentially micro-credentials can work with and work for. So we're going to look at some of those. So the criticism and critiques have come from two broad forms, whether it's both conceptual or operational. So conceptually, some critics have argued that our practice is linked to those neoliberal processes and the further entrenchment of corporate interests into higher education. So if you look at Ralston's famous critique at this point, you will know that his views really come from a position of, you know, the American higher education system, which we know is quite dominated by private HEIs, corporate influences, etc. And also we know that from the Australasian, some of the Australasian areas as well. So lots of emphasis on that notion of higher education, addressing economic needs, addressing and being there to service the demands, to service the industry, with little notions of the holistic concepts of education being good for education's sake. Other criticism come from the operationally, where looking at micro-credentials, where do they fit within a wider learning ecology? Like, what is their emphasis? What impact will they have? The assumed impact is taken from the assumed impact that we have with respect to all education, that education, it is inherently good. And therefore, the extension to that is that any form of learning, including micro-credentials, is learning. But some of the writers in this area are asking us to unpack that a little bit more. And we can see that that's coming through the literature quite nicely. So while these criticisms have some merit, there is a lot to talk about. There's a lot of tension between the lifelong, life-wide and employability. And we know from the European recommendation, we can see that Europe has tried to strike a balance between those, tried to talk about in real and meaningful terms what lifelong, life-wide means in respect to micro-credentials, and have been quite specific in the recommendation in itself. And then also address that employability. So I think there's an importance to that, in that Europe is trying to give that holistic approach to it, because I think we think that it merits that. And we should note that also these are not, as with many of these questions, they are political, they are tricky, they are political. So therefore, in one way, what is in a policy document then has to be acted out upon. So it's going to be the next stage of implementation, I think, is where we're going to see whether there is substance to the recommendation as nation states within Europe take these and attempt to address them in how they're developing initiatives out, how they are funding initiatives, more importantly, and how they're funding HEIs to address not only the employability aspect which micro-credentials purportedly support, but also those lifelong and life-wide. And I think this has been very interesting from my perspective, talking to a lot of the European universities and universities within Europe. A lot of the emphasis is really on the employability aspects of it. And this obviously, you know, they're obviously not doing this without reason, but that is the emphasis from lots of universities. So we're asking and we're looking at why institutions should think about it, and where the strategic alignment is between micro-credentials from the lifelong and the life-wide aspects as well. Moving on, I suppose DCU, we put together a higher education 4.0, certifying your MOOC, certifying your future MOOC. And in that, we talk specifically about the micro-credential movement. And from that, we have this, all of the promise of personalized learning pathways through unbundled courses is attractive, the concept requires further debate. So lots of universities, when they're looking at micro-credentials, they're seeing what they have in their current provision and saying, okay, I can take this module from that program and I can offer it as a micro-credential. So they're decoupling or they're unbundling. And I think there needs to be within institutions a wider debate on the premise of that and of the benefit of that to learners. So why are micro-credentials claimed to be the next big thing? What are the underlying drivers and attractors generating such interest in micro-credentials? And what is the change imperative? So we know that some of the underlying drivers for institutions relate to policy agendas, relates to funding, etc. But there should also be attractors for institutions to get involved in this space. And I think for a lot of institutions, they need to clarify that out, because we're getting to a point where we know that there's been micro-credential initiatives in quite a number of European states. We now have to look to the sustainability of those initiatives, and will they survive beyond their project periods? So in our paper, we're talking about reframing some of these narratives. And we know that the criticisms of micro-credentials in themselves can be both sweeping and generalized. So we're not assuming that those criticizing micro-credentials in themselves have made it based on any potentially some of the empirical evidence, or have gone and obtained empirical or theoretical evidence even to within those criticisms in itself. But we do think that it's time, and we know that it's time for our European institutions to work through some of those major issues in and around the lifelong, life-wide and employability, and for those perspectives to be taken seriously within implementation. As I said, some of the national and European interventions, and from that we have to look through, well, what is the value proposition? So defining value more broadly for us, and I think this is a nice one from central to the challenge of developing, and this is a critique that we had, that Mairéad and Carrie had in their paper, which was an address really to Ralston in response to Ralston. Well, central to the challenge of developing a good micro-credential is defining its value to the learner as well as to the university. So again, an important aspect of this. While skills development is often framed as a motivation for micro-credential development, this is not the sole consideration for many institutions. Other concerns may be about the public good, providing flexibility and targeted learning, and the cost of education. So if we were going to take micro-credentials and to take some of those social issues that we know that we have and have been called out in numerous European documents, we can see that some of them include social participation, active citizenship, inclusivity, equality, environmental consciousnesses, and intercultural awareness and understanding. These are some of the big themes that are coming out, along with others. I'll just get my thingy to move on. So far from being soft, some of these values are really hardcore. As we know, sustainability, climate action, all of these issues are massively important to this current generation, to our current lives and to our future lives. So we face a host, obviously, of these challenges. So these aspects are of great importance to all learners as citizens and reflect collective challenges which require social and real solutions. So we're thinking in this space, and from that context, potentially micro-credentials are very, very important. And, I won't go in to talk about some of the transversal skills, but I will go to talk about how we see that impacting in some of the initiatives that my own university, DCU, is involved in. And this is I've just taken from, are we being good ancestors, or should be the central question of our time? So really important things to think about, that as we are, and as many nation states are putting a lot of money into micro-credential development, we shouldn't lose sight of some of those major questions, those major topical questions that I've illustrated. So these values strongly underpin European policy approaches and commitments, including in the micro-credential sphere. So again, micro-credentials, as called out in the recommendation, emphasize societal, personal, cultural, or labour market needs. So again, not just on the employability agenda, And also we know that part of some micro-credentials, which are employment or skills focused, that might also have a resonate personally, but there are also maybe micro-credentials that are just there for the benefit of learning, which are really, really important as well. Mightn't go too much into this because I've spoken a little bit about the notion of the transitions. They're really important. The two transitions, particularly being emphasized within Europe, whether that's the green and digital. And this, I suppose, is another reason why we should be looking at micro-credentials from a larger perspective. This is sort of the lifelong learning within, I'm just going to move this out of your way. And people at risk of poverty or social exclusion in EU member states. So again, very, very high numbers, and this is, you know, this is why micro-credentials are being called out within policy documents. So we know that there is a value for them, particularly from a social perspective. So I just get back now to this. So space. So as I said, the micro opportunity, social challenges would appear well suited to a micro-credential approach because we know the work-life balance. People may need to work and also learn at the same time, and how to do that may not be in the traditional approaches of providing large macro qualifications. There's space for experimental and elective elements that could augment larger qualifications for current students. And there could be different drivers for adult learners. So if we're trying to bring a certain amount of the adult population within Europe back into education and learning, to do that from a smaller perspective, may be a less daunting task than those to engage in a major qualification. So I think that there's numerous reasons why potentially there could be an opportunity for micro-credentials. When we did this diagram really is based off the analysis we did on the literature, and from that we can see what the drivers were, and the drivers mainly come from the labour market, and then in and around you will have from some of the, you know, you will have emphasis put on social, personal and culture, but the specific drivers from that, and what we're calling for is that they can be equally as important to each other, and that we should be developing out micro-credentials with that in space. But in our university, in Dublin City University, we have a strong interest in the development of transdisciplinary and scale forms of learning. And we're very, very cognizant that one size doesn't fit all. So, and we know that our approach, it has to be different, whether that's at the institutional, national and international perspectives. And we're involved in a number of initiatives that look at this, and we're trying to engage with micro-credentials in different ways, dependent on the initiative that we're involved in. So again, so whether that's through the ECIU University, where we have a particular focus on the SDG, looking at smart cities and communities, whether it's looking through the lens of microcreds, which is looking at skilled development, career transitioners, etc. So the employability mainly agenda in there, with some aspects of lifelong learning, or whether it's through our undergraduate provision, through our initiative there, looking at reinventing how undergraduates engage with their education. So we're looking at micro-credentials from a broad perspective and how they can be incorporated across numerous ways. So from an ECIU perspective, we've taken decisions and principles where we put the emphasis on social good and learner development versus market-driven forms of commodified or atomized learning. We're trying to implement active pedagogical approaches. So we're not trying what we're not trying to do in ECIU University is to pack out a shop window. We're trying to put in a learning experience, which is going to be authentic, which is going to be co-constructed, and which is going to place the learner at the center, and not just in some sort of trope way, but actually trying to engage them by using pedagogical levers to support their learning and to support them through that process. And then also looking at the guidance and empowerment of learners to build personalized, flexible learning futures. And I think that's a really, really important part, because some of the emphasis within the literature is on micro-credentials, being that suddenly as a learner or as a student out there, you'll know exactly what you want to do. And that's not always the case, you know, whether for course selection or learning that you need to engage in. So I think scaffolded, supporting learners making their own scaffolded personalized learning experience is a really, really important aspect of the work that we're trying to do in the ECIU University. We delivered out a paper earlier on in this year in June to talk about the different areas that we're focusing on. And we're trying to say those have, whether it's active citizenship. So note again, doing that in very specific and bespoke ways. Each individual has a right, and recognizing that and the subsequent responsibility that goes with those rights. Empowered learning, that they can exercise choice, preference, and control over their pathways. So again, that it doesn't necessarily, pathways don't have to be institutionally led, but institutionally supported provision for learners. And that learners will have, because we recognize the importance of being able to earn and the employability agenda and all of that, but that's realistic, and that it comes from a growth mindset, as opposed to your learning is completed and therefore is fixed, and that you will take multiple pathways throughout your life. So hopefully, I'm just trying to keep an eye on time. We have a number of values and we have a number of values that we have, and these are outlined on this screen. I mightn't go into all of them because I'm just cognizant that I may be coming close to the end and give some time. I won't talk about the Microcreds initiative because Emma's going to do that. I do want to point out to an initiative though in Alberta in Canada, which I think is really, really important. It's a good one to look up. It's a good one to understand, and it's a good one from a lifelong learning approach. And in this, they talk about microcredentials, and it's very much focused on the learner. But just to draw your attention to this aspect, so the unifying principles that they have put in: tailored support for lifelong learning. So you can see the driven by industry need, but they've also called out the lifelong learning part. And just to provide your focus there, they've actually, if you see here, they've emphasized one of the major challenges that we know that we have across nations, whether within Europe or more globally, is the mental health challenges as well that have come more to the fore. So in conclusion, and I know I've got 1 or 2 minutes left, microcredentials are a huge topic of debate. And I think it's really, really important that we both interrogate the function that they have, but we also assess the implementation. We also assess the policies and the programs that are being put in place, both at European and national, and then at institutional level for their development. We need to think of the ecological and social aspects of it, because there is a clear emphasis on the other aspects of the employability agenda. And we possibly need to reframe the narrative of labour, and coming from the, I suppose, the human capital emphasis of what is on this, I think it'd be really, really important that we could do that. So hopefully I've presented to you some of the European values, which potentially could have an alternative model for microcredential development, and that some of these aspects will come into potentially your sphere of influence, and that you can think about it if your institution or if the organization or policy development that you're engaged with is thinking of developing out microcredentials. So thank you very much, and I'll finish up there and take any questions.
Thank you very much. It was really, really interesting, and thank you for looking at be conscious of time. We have a question in the chat. It is about, I don't know if Elna wanted to say this question, but probably if you type it, you didn't want to talk. I don't know, shall I read it for you?
No, I can see it. So just 1 or 2 articles on the important perspectives. Elna, I'll send you on. I'll send them, I think, because it's really, really important. I think from the social perspective of it, there's 1 or 2 that have come to the fore that stand out. Again, you know, the aspects that Mairéad and Kerry emphasized, because they were very much in response to Ralston. And I remember talking to them as they were setting out to write their paper. They said, we just feel like we need to address this paper, because this paper is slating microcredentials. It's slating it, was completely missing the point of there is potentially an inherent good when you come out, when you have a system, a wider system, a wider system of where there is a huge public emphasis on education. So I can understand from Ralston's point of view where he was coming from with respect to, you know, looking at how it's being, I suppose, I won't say the word right, but it's the corporate focus for microcredentials in the US has gone a full steam ahead. But there is a more wider perspective. And I think Beverly Oliver's paper back in 2019 actually called this out as well. You know, Beverly wrote and said very, very well. She turned out and she just said very, very well. She said, look, microcredentials are there and potentially can be available to a whole sector beyond just, and I say beyond just without disrespecting this, beyond just those who are looking to reskill or upskill into new sectors or into new areas to answer particular needs. And she was focusing on those who are returning into work for the first time. So looking at, you know, home parents, you know, etc., looking at older people and all of those type of things. So Beverly's article is pretty good on that as well. So I don't want to eat into Emma's time, so I might just finish there.
We have another question. Would you see stackable microcredential as a possible approach to meaningful continued professional development in education?
Absolutely. So we know, and we have evidence of that, Kevin, in Ireland. We already have, you know, whether it's sort of some of the professional organizations that do stackable learning. We know that that's what a lot of the IUA microcreds initiative partners are looking to. We have a whole emphasis currently on stackability within the project, and we're looking to get to some principles, and we're looking to get to a position where we can do that a lot easier across the partner institutions. But stacking is a really, really important aspect of it. But the basis for stacking has to be really, really clear. And I think we can do institutional stacking. That's no problem. We can do that ourselves. But I think where stacking is going to be really, really important is looking at the RPL perspectives related to stacking and those aspects of it. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the need for clarification. And I think lots of work that we've been doing in Europe around that, and even in the recommendation, the emphasis on the European data model and all of those requirements will be really important to help institutions to recognize the learning from other institutions as well. So yes, stacking is definitely going to be a key to this as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I would say if really there is an urgent question, we go for it. Otherwise, I will say we continue. So if you're strong in typing or you want to speak up, I'll give you half a second. Otherwise, yeah, I don't see anybody type. Yeah, perfect, looking forward. Yeah, thank you so very much, Mairéad. And we pass the floor to Emma now. And I don't introduce your topic further because I suppose you will do so. So thank you very much. I see already you're sharing and it's visible. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody. Can you see that properly?
Yes, yes, it is visible in presenting mode. Thank you.
Perfect. That's great. Well, listen, thanks very much to the EADTU and to Stefan for the invitation to share our work today. There's been so many interesting talks over the last couple of sessions, and it's great to see the breadth and the diversity of the work that's underway. I really enjoyed Mairéad's talk as well. Mairéad is part of our Microcredentials project, as she's outlined. She's our steering group member, so it's great to see the work underway across DCU and indeed the ECIU network as well. So as Alessandra said, my name is Dr. Emma Francis, and I'm the project officer on the Microcredentials project, and I'm based at the Irish Universities Association. I'll give you a high-level overview of our work at the project, and then a closer look at how we are approaching this dynamic enterprise collaboration for microcredentials. So the interest in and development of microcredentials, as we know, is growing at pace internationally across Europe, and particularly here with us in Ireland. I'd like to start with a statistic from the World Economic Forum. And I think for us, it sort of neatly captures the scale of the challenge for higher education providers and indeed for enterprise. Reskilling and upskilling is an urgent necessity, and this is arising from a range of stimuli, including the pace of digital transformation, the challenges associated with reaching these zero carbon targets, post-COVID impacts, although for many COVID is still a feature of our daily lives, unfortunately, the cost of living, and then the competition for talent as well. So we know that research shows that around 90% of European SMEs consider themselves to be lagging behind in digital innovation. The European Commission, they've launched an initiative on skills for SMEs, and this is to really analyse the root causes for this and to try to help to remedy this situation. One aspect for us stands out. SMEs are increasingly under pressure. They're trying to compete with larger companies in what's a really tight job market. There's significant skills-related issues across many company roles. There's lack of digital leadership skills right at the top. There's shortages of IT professionals, and there's essentially really a severe lack of adequate skills amongst users as well. So cumulatively, these skill shortages, these skills gaps, and these skills mismatches, they're really hindering organizations to define their growth strategies, to implement these strategies, and then be able to enable employees to actually use and to engage with these new technologies as they emerge. So micro-credentials, they're emerging as a key solution to these issues. And we see them that they can be a short, sharp, and flexible way for individuals to engage really with lifelong learning. So what is the Microcreds project? Well, we have we're a 5-year project. We have just under 12.5 million euros of a budget running through to 2025. We're approximately at the halfway point now. And we're funded under what's called the Human Capital Initiative Fund in Ireland, and specifically under Pillar 3. And this funding supports projects such as our own in the alignment of innovation and agility with our national strategic objectives, key system objectives for the higher education system, and also for the future skills needs for both society and the economy. And these projects, they're inherently collaborative in nature with enterprise. We're working with them to develop dynamic and responsive models of program delivery, really effectively amplifying the higher education sector's ability to respond rapidly to changes in skills requirements and these new technologies. So we consider ourselves to be a really ambitious project. It's led by the Irish Universities Association, or IUA, and we're working with 7 of our partner universities, and they're collaborating to develop, to pilot, and to evaluate the building blocks that are required for this transformation across lifelong and life-wide learning through microcredentials. And the project aims to really deliver on the potential of microcredentials to reimagine this relationship between universities and learners, and especially universities and enterprise. So here are our 7 project partner universities, many of which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. Several are members of the wider European University Alliances. So we have Dublin City University, where Mairéad is from, Maynooth University, Trinity College Dublin, University College Cork, University College Dublin, University of Galway, and University of Limerick. This is the IUA project team. We have Dr. Lynn Ramsey, who is our current director of Microcreds, David Korskinen, who is our digital engagement and communications officer, and then myself as project officer. We are indeed quite a small team, but we're very well complemented by the wider IUA organisation and our project leads, who are shown here. Our project leads are really well placed in their respective universities to help drive this project from the centre. They're bringing practical and pragmatic change really right to the fore, enabling microcredentials to become an established aspect of the learning ecosystem in Ireland. Our project leads are based in different locations across their respective universities. So for example, some are based in careers, some are in the adult education, others are in graduate or professional studies, but it's really reflective of the strategic importance of this project and how it's viewed by our partner universities. So for a brief overview of the project, we really work across 4 key strands. Firstly, the development of the national framework for microcredentials across our partner universities. And the purpose here is for us to achieve consensus around our understanding of what a microcredential is in an Irish higher education context. And this work is really underpinned by the work that was ongoing from the European Commission. And it's also worth noting here that there are 17 other major HCI funded projects nationally that have microcredentials as key project outputs. But this is the project that is specifically charged with developing the national framework. My focus today will be on our activities in Strand 2, and that's the development of engagement with enterprise for the development and rollout of microcredentials. I'm concentrating today on our engagement with enterprise that targets priority skills gaps, and this is through a model that we call Microcreds Innovate. Thirdly, we're designing and developing a coordinated online portal, and this will really help to drive the awareness of and access to our microcredentials. And this will also be linked to a digital credentialing solution. So we anticipate that this digital infrastructure is going to really facilitate a positive learner experience right from the initial interaction. We've undertaken considerable scoping work on this portal. It's currently in development, and I'm really pleased that this will launch early next year. And then finally, we're working across the universities to create this comprehensive suite of course offerings across diverse disciplines, and to also market these courses, helping learners and enterprise to find and track these flexible offerings, which we aim that will meet and respond to their needs. Microcredentials have been coming on stream from our partner university since last year. There's many more in development, and they'll all feature on our portal once it's launched shortly. So what is a microcredential? According to our framework for microcredentials, we have aligned with the definition of the recent European Council recommendation. Microcredentials are on level 6 to 9 of the Irish National Framework of Qualifications. This corresponds to level 5 to 8 on the European Qualifications Framework. They're quality assured, and they have a credit range of between 1 to 30 ECTS. The universities can choose within the ECTS range and NFQ levels that are consistent with their own institutional policies, their own practices and preferences. The microcredentials can be standalone credentials, or they can stack towards a larger award, and they are typically developed in response to an identified need. David Korskinen, our Digital Engagement and Communications Officer, leads out on the communications work for the Microcreds project. And this has become a really substantial and critical aspect of the work as it's developed. David leads out on the Microcred Communications Working Group, and this is comprised of our project leads, leading marketing personnel from across the 7 universities, and we also have enterprise representatives as part of the group. So they've developed clear and coherent communication strategies to align and to complement the work that's underway across the university partners. And this is over the 3 pillars shown here, as this is comprehension and awareness, credibility and value. And this work is very much supported through the peer learning network, and that's ongoing both it's through the communications working group. And there's a 2-pronged marketing approach being utilised here. So this is at the national and at the local level, and this aims to really reflect the diversity and scope of microcredentials that are being developed through the project. Microcreds touches on all aspects of the core functions of our universities, which I'm sure you can imagine it can be a challenge, but it's really helping us to drive the work forward. This includes registry, quality assurance, teaching and learning, our research centres, and also ICT systems. We actively and continuously collaborate both within and across our university partners, other higher education institutions nationally and internationally, with our national skills architecture here in Ireland. That can include the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, our Department of Further and Higher Education, with enterprise and with quality and qualifications agencies. So obviously that is QQI in Ireland, and then externally through our outreach activities. This is just some very quick examples of the reach of our work of microcreds to date. Thanks to online engagements such as today, we can have a further reach than might have been previously possible. But David has created this map which highlights some of our in-person activities by our project leads, our steering members, and our own IUA project team. So hopefully we'll get to a few more exotic locations before the project finishes. So bringing the focus back today on enterprise engagement for microcredentials, I'll give you now a high-level overview of some of the work underway across Strand 2. So with this meaningful engagement with enterprise for microcredentials through Microcreds Innovate. With Microcreds, we're aiming to deliver on the potential for microcredentials to reimagine this lifelong learning and how universities and enterprise collaborate. So taking that into consideration, what has the enterprise engagement landscape around priority skills gap learning looked like in Ireland over recent years? So back in 2020, the IUA commissioned the Genesis report as part of the foundational work for the Microcreds project. And this gave us key insights, really for the first time sectorally, into the diverse and the non-linear approaches to enterprise engagement across universities. And it's crystallized for us the need through Microcreds to create a situation where more active collaboration through our work was possible. And this was through the use of more insightful data, being able to accurately identify enterprise needs, communicating these needs clearly to universities, the universities being able to respond to those needs in a more timely way, all while having due consideration for the institutional and the quality assurance policies and procedures that are in place. So bearing these insights in mind, the Enterprise Advisory Group was established. And this comprises senior members from business representative bodies in Ireland, enterprise agencies, private sector companies, and state bodies with responsibilities for skills. And this group functions to act as the representative voice of Irish enterprise to the university sector in this regard. And you can see some of our members here, some of the less camera shy members. So there's many variable factors when you're trying to identify what a priority skills gap is. There's the employers themselves, employees, there's state bodies, national and international data reports, and so on. But how to distill and directly communicate all of these variables into a clear ask or direction for the universities to support them in developing quality offerings such as microcreds, microcredentials. But taking into consideration factors which we believe to be essential, these include firstly inputs from the state architecture and government departments. So in Ireland, this is the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, the Expert Group on Future Skills Needs, or EGFSN. We have representative organisations, including the Regional Skills Fora, the Small Firms Association, IBEC, our enterprise agencies, including IDA and Enterprise Ireland, and then obviously enterprise themselves. Secondly, there are many rich information sources accessible to us through the skills data and skills forecasting systems. And that can include the Skills and Labour Market Research Unit, SETAFOP, National Skills Council data, Enterprise Ireland data, and EGFSN reports. And then cumulatively bringing together all of these stakeholders and data sources together with the universities in a tightly structured format to stimulate and to drive the development of microcredentials themed around these priority skills gaps. And this is through the format we call Microcreds Innovate. So from running a number of these events to date, we believe Microcreds Innovate has the potential to be a sustainable model for data-informed university collaboration for microcredentials. Our event themes are aligned to the publication of key national policy reports, and this really helps to elevate the sectoral interest and participation. With regards to the event format, we work really closely with our project leads in each of the universities to identify academics to participate. We want to ensure that they're invested and supportive in the development of microcredentials in their institutions. We identify enterprise participants through our Enterprise Advisory Group network, and then detailed outputs are shared with our participants in advance of the event, and this can include policy summaries, data highlights, and participant information, and this really helps to drive the collaborative and networking nature of these events. But these events are fully online, and it enables us to provide facilitated space within these events to explore the enterprise-informed development in a much more focused way, supporting the university's capacities to anticipate, to understand, and to respond to these emerging skills needs. Our academic and enterprise attendees are invited to participate in highly structured thematic sessions. We have key speakers who are intrinsically involved in the relevant national policies. They present short, focused insights, and then we capture data in a number of ways to enable this post-event impact evaluation. And this is through the use of note takers, through surveys, and we use Padlet as a resource throughout the events. And the structure also allows for direct follow-up afterwards with our participants. This slide just gives an overview of our recent events to date. Bearing in mind that these sessions only really began in January of this year. Our first event was on zero carbon and aligned with the publication of a major EGFSN report, which is called Skills for Zero Carbon, in January. The second event on digital transformation and artificial intelligence aligned with the Skills for AI report by the EGFSN and also the National Framework on Harnessing Digital. The third event was of particular interest. The SME sector has historically been viewed as a challenging sector to reach for all sorts of reasons, but we aimed our event with a focus on management and leadership skills throughout the SME sector, and this aligned with the EGFSN Leading the Way report. Our most recent event, as you can tell from the date, was held just yesterday. We had a refocus on the SME sector in Ireland around specific skills identified by the Enterprise Ireland Spotlight on Skills data. And this identified the most pressing skills shortages being experienced by SMEs currently in Ireland. And these are project management, communications, talent management, and sales. It was a really interesting session with high-level individuals from all of these sectors, and it's provided us with a lot of really interesting insights, which we'll collate and analyse as we move forward. Whereas, as you can see, we're steadily increasing our participant numbers event on event, and it's fairly equally distributed between academic and enterprise participants, which is really important for us. And as well as just to go back, we'll also hold our next event on the biopharma chem sector next year. This is a major sector in Ireland, as I'm sure many of you will be aware of. We're going to align with the publication of the next EGFSN report, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this event develops. And we also have a lot of interest from both our universities and pharma companies on this, which is really positive to see. So Microcredentials Innovate as a model has been really well received amongst our participants to date, with its clear themes, its objectives, and the majority have said they would recommend to their colleagues, which is always a good sign for academics in particular. Most importantly, though, it's identified the need for a significant awareness raising amongst both universities and enterprise. And this is a key area of focus for us, and I've outlined that this is really a target for our communications work. From our analysis, there's several notable benefits for enterprise that are either engaging or considering engaging with microcredentials. And this is also particularly important for the SME sector. Their inherent flexibility supports enterprise as a way of closing out their skills gaps. It can help them address changes in the labour market in a much more agile and cost-effective way. It can improve enterprise productivity, aid in career development and progression pathways for employees. It can help expand these existing training and professional development programs. and it is a really attractive way to enhance the staff retention and improve recruitment both nationally and internationally. And it's also very useful in addressing these pandemic related job impacts or other socioeconomic shifts as they emerge. It's also enabled us to identify enterprise critical issues relevant for microcredentials across the university sector with regards to quality and accreditation, teaching and learning, and research collaboration, identifying possible obstacles, how to overcome them. And it's also been very helpful with our position nationally and on the European level. So we'll continue to refine and to evolve this approach to Microcreds Innovate. We see it as an enabling model. And as I said, we have further thematic events and development as we proceed throughout the remainder of the project. So what do microcredentials look like that are being developed? There's some examples here of a few from our partners which are addressing specific enterprise needs and challenges. You can see there's an example from each of our universities. There's a range here. Some of them are fully online, some of them are hybrid. There's variation in the length of time they take to undertake and the amount of credits, but that's just an example of some of our microcredentials that are currently available. And just before I conclude, we've a parallel Erasmus project ongoing called Micronet, and this is led by IUA together with ECIU. Also DCU are one of our partners here, the UNIC network through UCC, the European Universities Association and QQI. And this newly formed consortium will aim over the lifetime of the project to work collaboratively as a network right across the EHEA to promote the awareness and understanding of microcredentials, to share good policy and practice approaches to quality assurance for microcredentials using the Bologna tools, and to develop and to grow the understanding and support for learner mobility and pathways across the EHEA, and also around the portability and stacking of microcredentials. So we're hosting our launch event for this consortium on Wednesday, the 14th of December, and the registration link is here in the QR code, and you'll be very welcome to attend. So we've got a good lineup of speakers, and you might be familiar with some. We've Vanessa de Bay-Santon, who's the head of higher education unit at the DG for Education and Youth. Robert Plummer is coming from Business Europe. Clara Engels and William O'Keefe, who many of you will be familiar with from their work on Microball, will be contributing, along with Keith Moynes, who's our Assistant Secretary General of the Department of Higher Education, and Leo Kilroy, who's our Permanent Representative for Education and Skills from Ireland. I hope I haven't gone too much over time. I've listed our contact details here, and the QR code, I'm fond of QR codes, they will link you directly into our project web page where you can find out any more information on the project, on our partner institutions, and on our work with enterprise. So thanks very much for listening, and happy to take any questions you may have now. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Very clear and insightful presentation. I asked people if please you could type your question or just turn on the microphone and make one. We have one from Kevin. Let me know if I have to read it for you or you go solo.
I can bring it up here.
I can go solo.
Okay, yeah, please.
I think I have a headphone here. I hope you can hear me. Just I've noticed innovation to in microcreds in business and enterprises, so they're keeping the skilling in house. And I suppose regarding microcreds, you want to have quality assurance across the board in those courses, so that when you transfer jobs onto possible future employees, that you can actually carry those skills forward. So I suppose the danger is that when it is privatized, that the higher education institutes can be kind of sidelined a bit. Is there a danger of that to a certain degree? And I suppose when you're looking at enterprise partnerships with university, knowledge transfer seems to be one of the most important things that kind of keep that communication going. So it almost does. Would you imagine that kind of bridging the gap between identifying the impact of microcreds in that area? So I suppose it's a kind of a twofold question. I suppose the danger of privatization, and then KT and the role of KT in identifying those needs. So I'm sorry about the long-winded question.
No, thanks, Kevin. It's a really interesting point. I think I'm not sure if I would consider them privatization of microcredentials. I think this is a mutually informative process. I suppose, I think that, I mean, we have to, I suppose, we have to look to our funding, and our funding is from the Human Capital Initiative through the Higher Education Authority. We do have a very heavy enterprise ethos, and I suppose, as Mairéad has outlined in her previous talk, there are other sectors that we have to, you know, that are mindful as well. There's the social, personal and cultural that Mairéad referred to, but particularly for enterprise, I think enterprise are very keen to become involved with the process and the structures that we're developing. And it's really creating this signposting for enterprise to be able to engage with our universities in a much more streamlined and efficient way. We're very aware of very good work. I mean, I come from a research background myself. I know how the system works to some degree, that really good enterprise collaboration happens, but it can be siloed sometimes in universities as well. So this is a way of bringing it to the fore and allowing everybody to benefit, but I wouldn't necessarily consider it privatization. There are many private providers out there and they're, you know, they're obviously doing very good work, and enterprise would have long-standing associations with these private providers, but I maybe Mairéad would disagree, I don't know, but we would certainly wouldn't consider them privatized.
Okay, maybe it was the wrong word there.
I might come in there just on that point as well. There's I suppose the differential factor is that when a university is providing a co-constructed micro-credential with industry and it's for university credit, all of the QA that goes around that will be inherent in that process. So in a way, so there's credits and then there's that micro-credential. When it's coming from an industry, and I've looked at a lot of the industry micro-credentials, and there's loads out there, and there's some that are, you know, exceptionally well done, exceptionally clear. Sometimes there is a mismatch between what we would expect in how learning is described, it's assessed, and etc. So I think there is a tension definitely between how we will be able to recognize some of the, maybe you say we call it work-based learning or the industry training programs, etc. But I don't think it's insurmountable. I think we all have to get into a position where we're all talking the same language in a certain perspective, and particularly where, you know, around education and higher education in particular, we're very clear on, you know, we want to maintain that QA process independent of it being a shorter form of learning. There has to be some sort of, that's the value add that the university brings to it, and the higher education institution. It's that assurance, that validation of that is, you know, and I think that's where we have to be careful. And I think lots of institutions, and my own as well, you know, we get approached by lots of industries will say, I have a training program here. Can you not just validate it and provide credit for that? We go, okay, grand. And when we look under the hood on some of those, it's stuff that we wouldn't ever do. It's very much at a particular level focused. So I think there is a tension in and around that. And there's also, you know, when you look at the mission of most European publicly funded institutions, there is that social mission of learning for learning being good, and all of that type of stuff. So I think there is that tension definitely, and we're not going to, I don't ever think, get into a position where we'll say, or we'll get into where there'll be a wholesale, you know, come here, we'll be your clearinghouse for industry to say stamp, and yeah, that's grand now, that's got a EADTU logo.
I think that would be inappropriate, I think, for the, particularly for the autonomy of the universities, Mairéad, absolutely.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, thank you both so much.
We have a very long question from Dawn that I don't know if he wants to pick up, or shall we go through reading? Yeah, I think we go for reading. So Emma, shall I read it for you? Many present the Vice Chancellor are not convinced about micro-credential, and there is a considerable concern it will not be sounder. I'll let you do. I think you're faster.
Thanks. Thanks, John, for your comment. The many present Vice Chancellors are not convinced of micro-credentials. There's considerable concern it will not be sound return on investment. Given these leaders must take decisions about setting their institutional priorities that should be funded and staffed, should all institutions be engaged in micro-credentials? I think that's certainly, coming from the Irish University Association perspective, I think that's a decision for each institution to make based on its own strategic priorities, I think that's certainly an independent question. If not, our consortia or institutional partnerships and a viable approach. Well, I think certainly in Ireland there is a sense that enterprise have a huge appetite for microcredentials. And running out the Microcreds Innovate events over a number of thematic areas that would be of these priority skills gaps that are identified by our government essentially. We can see that there is an appetite for it. I think that there's huge demand there. It's just, I suppose there's a job to be done in clearly communicating, you know, what are the learning outcomes, what are the benefits, what's the return on investment for enterprise as well. So it's a really kind of complex and multifaceted concept really. But I, from my own perspective, from the work that we've seen from going out and talking to enterprise, talking to our universities, I do think there is value there. And certainly, you know, these consortia or interinstitutional partnerships, I think that there could certainly be value there, but obviously it is a decision for each institution to take based on their own merit.
I see you, Mairéad, you were nodding. Do you want to add something?
I think, as Emma said, you know, it's up to institutions to realise the drivers and strategy. So I actually don't think microcredentials are right for every institution to do. I think there will be a continuum of institutions that will be involved in this. And some of the reasons are really, really practical. They're superbly practical, but they're also, as Don has pointed out, financial. The scalability issue of doing this, there's a necessity, you know, for institutions across Europe, across the world have been developed mostly from the perspective of top down, as in programmatic major programs. Then, so when you're asked, all our systems, all our processes are developed from that perspective. So when you're trying to do it from a bottom up at a granular level, which microcredentials potentially could be, you could be expending a huge amount of cost on something that could be 1 ECTS up to 5 ECTS. And the return on investment, whether you want to look at it from if you're looking at it from a purely financial lens, can be that it makes it absolutely uneconomical for you to engage in this type of learning approach. So I think we have to take that into account, because not all institutions are well funded. We know from the Irish perspective, there's a massive underfunding of higher education institutions. Government have done some things to address this, but not enough, as we know. So I think it's not a case of microcredentials are going to be available or should be available. I think what Donna said in the second part of that question is, if you still think you can get involved or should be involved, then of course consortia coming together with like-minded institutions. And I think the like-minded and like-driven institutions are really important. And that's why the university alliances, so most university alliances now for the Erasmus Plus, the second round of this, of the university alliances, have put a focus on microcredentials, and that's giving opportunity to European universities to put their toe in the water, to see and have a look, and to use their combined strengths to come out and develop out microcredentials in specific areas or for specific things. I remember sitting on the EADTU seminar there and looking at a group of institutions who had put together one in relation to cultural, it's an element of cultural heritage, and they were able to 4 or 5 institutions to come together to do that, and that was a really interesting approach. So I think from that perspective, there are ways that institutions, if they can't go full on board or full steam ahead with microcredentials, they can get involved in a way that will sort of potentially just manage the risk of going full board into microcredentials without having to do huge changes to systems and processes. And yeah, you're right, there is strength in numbers.
Yeah, thank you a lot to both of you for this insight, and the comment of Don allow me to give also an answer from EADTU and the project we are coordinating on modularization of continuing education. So as you know, there was the European Commission proposal of recommendation that then became a recommendation on microcredential. And it is a request coming from the European Commission to respond nationally So MTE, this project is a way of giving an answer to that. We didn't know the European Commission would have acted that fast from a proposal to actually adopting them. But it is a way for all the partners and the nation involved in this MCE to kind of have a voice in the process of creating strategy for microcredential at the institutional level and adapt this recommendation how suits best the institution. Part of this project is Carles, the next speaker, who will give you some insight on some work we have done, and I don't say more because I leave the floor to you, Carles.
Okay. Thank you, Alessandra. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, perfect.
Correct?
It's really well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Carles Bruguera, researcher from the Open University of Catalonia, and I'm very pleased to present the research the research we are carrying out in our institution, along with my colleagues Carmen Pazès and Àngels Fitó. Well, the focus of this presentation is a literature review on the perspective of learners towards microcredentials. And first of all, as Alessandra have introduced, let me contextualize this research a little bit. The systematic review has been carried out within the framework of the Erasmus Plus project, Modular Continuing Higher Education by Microcredentials, that is coordinated by the EADTU, and in which 10 higher education institutions from across Europe collaborate. Well, only to add to Alessandra, this project has a duration of 3 years and started recently in April of this year. To sum up, before I explain our research, with a multi-level focus, let's say in general terms, the MC project aims to first investigate the learner's perspective in relation to microcredentials, further developing the concept of microcredentials in Europe, to support higher education institutions in the development of microcredentials, and 3, provide evidence to policymakers in relation to microcredentials. So here, very briefly, in a very synthesized way, I'll show you some of the different types of the project and its outputs. The first phase of the project, to contextualize, which is the focus of this presentation, corresponds to the student's perspective on microcredentials. This phase is divided into 2 products, outputs, a review of the literature on this topic, and a focus group with students of the partners institution. The second stage results in a review of partners' institutional policies. The third stage will result in a manual for the design, implementation, and recognition of microcredentials in partners' institutions, and in a seminar in each institution for faculty staff. In the fourth stage, each partner will develop and evaluate a pilot of microcredentials in their institutions. And finally, the final stage results in a review of national policies. So, as can be seen, each phase intends to inform and contribute to the following ones. Okay, so in this presentation, I will focus on the literature review, mainly on microcredentials. And if I have time, I will briefly explain the focus groups that we are carrying out in a very summarized ways. In this sense, I'm happy to announce that the report on the literature review on this research will be openly available on the project website, I guess, in the coming days. Okay, before going any further, I would like to briefly comment on the motivations for conducting the research beyond the project. As for the context, as you have discussed in these days, in the last decade, many different definitions of microcredentials and similar terms have coexisted, often being used as synonyms. As a literature state, this variety of terminologies for the term microcredentials have resulted some way in a general confusion and low understanding among universities, employers, policymakers, accreditation bodies, and of course, learners. And in this context, the European Commission recommended adopting a European approach to microcredentials to generate a common understanding among stakeholders. But in any case, the different definition beyond the one of the European Union highlight the importance of microcredentials as a response to the learning needs. In this regard, in parallel to the crystallization of an European approach to microcredentials, there has been a solid academic production on microcredentials. Also, taking into account or considering the learner's point of view, many publications focus on MOOCs only, or are conceptual papers trying to make sense, very interesting, but trying to make sense of microcredentials in the educational landscape. So few papers, or we have found that few papers directly research learners' perspective towards microcredentials, providing empirical data about these learning needs that are pointed out by various definitions of microcredentials as very important. So having learners inside is very important, of fundamental importance to inform educational institutions and government policies, to offer tailor-made learner-centric training, and in the end, to support students' career pathways and lifelong education. Okay, so now let's focus on the design of the literature review. The research that we are presenting here implements a systematic review that tries to identify, select, and synthesize a high-quality research evidence relevant to a research question. And precisely the research questions focus that are the focus of study are related to what the research done so far on the topic says about the main characteristics of research on learner perspective on microcredentials, the different learners' drivers or motivations for pursuing microcredentials, and then the learner's preferences towards short learning experiences and its accreditation. Very briefly, the list of inclusion criteria for the publication included searching for articles published in the last 5 years, recently relevant, in English or Spanish, from peer-reviewed journals, and that provide primary data on the learner's motivations and preferences for microcredentials. A search was conducted using different combinations of key terms grouped into 3 blocks closely related to the research questions. And the sources of information included 2 social science reference databases, Scopus and Easy Web of Science, the 50 first results on Google Scholar, a novel technique selecting articles among the bibliographical references of other publications, and partners and expertise of partners of the MCE project, taking advantage of their knowledge on the topic. The study selection process is illustrated in this Prisma flowchart, and in this sense, the initial set of articles found was reduced after 3 phases. In the first one, we read the title, the abstract, and keywords. Then we read the full text, and finally, we conducted a joint validation with the 3 WOC researchers. This third phase yielded 48 publications, which were the final ones included in our revision. The next step of the systematic review consisted in extracting the information of interest from the studies, and we organized the information into categories. First, for each article, we recorded the year, the impact of the journals, and the country of the authors. Then we recorded the characteristics of the samples, the time at which the data was collected, and the research tools performed. Regarding the learners' motivations, we recorded their answers or their insights relative to their drivers for taking microcredentials and the perceived benefits and disadvantages for their participation. And we also recorded their preferences, learners' preferences relative to online, face-to-face or blended modalities, synchronous or asynchronous sessions, duration and dedication of courses, preferred schedule, whether full-time or part-time, relation with other courses or stackability, with or without official credentials, and willingness to pay for obtaining credentials. So let's move on and let's discuss the results. The 48 articles reviewed were published between 2018 and April 2022. The highest number of articles was recorded in 2018, but as we have indicated, this results refers to literature that consider the perspective of students, not the literature of microcredentials in general. Regarding the journals index impact of the selected publications, a commonly used measure of quality, this figure shows how most of journals included in this systematic review are Q1 and Q2 in a particular area of the CIMAGO journal rank. Authors affiliated with universities from the United States, Spain, and the United Kingdom were the most numerous, followed by many Asian countries. Then MOOCs, especially, and university courses with digital badges were the most common terms to refer to microcredentials among authors of the publications. Here we can see that most studies assess learners' view on a particular short learning experiences in which they enrolled, in contrast with learners, professionals, or other collectives not enrolled in a particular short learning experience. Regarding the types of participants that have most often provided information, the general population at large, and university students, especially undergraduate and postgraduate, have been the most studied collectives. As for the methodology, most of selected studies employed a quantitative methodology followed by mixed and qualitative ones. And therefore, the most employed research tools to gather data were quantitative, most often questionnaire surveys, followed by far by qualitative ones such as interviews or focus groups. Then regarding the timing of data collection, the most recurring time point was during or after the completion of a specific short learning experience, as shown here. Only 11 publications collected data before or at the very beginning of a short learning experience. As for the learners' drivers and motivations for microcredentials, we merged and codified 10 types of drivers among the results of the 70% of publications that directly or indirectly assess this aspect. And we can say that the motivation for pursuing microcredentials to improve the motivation in current work is highlighted in many studies, as well to have access to selected and relevant updated content, to mitigate curiosity or for personal interest, or to participate in a flexible type of learning. Similarly, it was possible to identify the benefits of microcredentials as perceived by learners in 71 of the publications. Main perceived benefits that we have found are microcredentials flexibility regarding schedule, time, or access, the fact they complement other types of courses and enrich one's learning path, and being quick ways to acquire knowledge and professional skills. On the contrary, our findings indicate that learners perceive the following disadvantages from microcredentials: lack of motivations, especially related to MOOCs experiences, lack of interaction with other students or teachers, technological barriers, and a lack of recognition that they found by employers or other education providers. It should be noted, however, that many of these stated disadvantages relate to the particular format of MOOCs in which they were engaged and do not necessarily cover microcredentials in general. Then the issue of learners' preferences for microcredentials has been, let's say, scarcely studied in the literature. Only 4% of the selected studies formally assess learner preferences in their research questions or in their research methodologies. However, we extracted some information, very useful information related to preferences in other 35% of the studies. So, given the large share of papers with no information on a specific learner's preferences, results were presented as a percentage of the papers for which information was either formally or indirectly assessed. So this said, most studies did not elicit learners' preferences over different characteristics of course or credentials, but from the results of the publications, we can infer that the students are satisfied or are happy with learning that is online, synchronous, part-time, and that allows learning at their own pace. And obtaining credentials is valued by learners as they gather a proof of learning, but there is uncertainty about the usefulness of these credentials in the labor market. So finally, we would like to highlight some of the conclusions of our study by answering the different research questions proposed at the beginning of the presentation. As for the research characteristics, we have found an interest in microcredentials across continents in the line with the initiatives done worldwide. MOOCs are the most studied type of microcredentials, basing the research done so far, for sure. Questionnaire is the most widely used research tool, and this has meant that data has been collected during or after particular courses, often presenting results in the form of satisfaction and improvement surveys. The results of the literature review has uncovered many types of learners with different motivations, but in this sense, it is noteworthy that microcredentials are perceived as a tool to advance in the current job or in one's career and for just-in-time needs, and not so much as a tool to find a job for those who are unemployed or seeking another job. And equally significant is the fact that pursuing microcredentials for the pleasure of learning new things appears as an important driver for learners, as the debate, let's say, the debate around microcredentials often focuses on their instrumental value to achieve employment-related needs. So it is therefore not surprising that few studies directly tackle this research question regarding preferences, learners' preference, but the scan available evidence points to learner satisfactions with online asynchronous and part-time microcredentials. And similarly, despite credentials being a key element of the microcredentials movement, few papers discuss learners' views on this crucial matter, on credentialing and the elements that have to contain the credential. So from the existing evidence, we gather that learners value credentials as a proof of learnings that can be presented to companies or employers, but they are not sure about their usefulness. Well, as limitations, it should be noted that the conclusions drawn here are partially influenced by the type of studies available in the literature in these 5 years. As a direction for future research, it will be interesting to complement this study with the vision of employers and those responsible for public policies, because well, somehow credential is useful if it is widely recognized and accepted. And it will be useful to complement the existing literature with the studies that, without limiting themselves to a particular MOOC or a specific credentialing experience, elicit the specific preferences of people over different learning modalities and dedications, types of credentialing, or willingness to pay for credentials. But precisely the second part of our work in the project has to relate with trying to deepen the vision of the students, directly deepen on the vision of the students. So, well, very briefly, but 10 online focus group with a total of 37 students in the context of the work. At the moment, institutions were conducted in July 2022. They also had to answer a questionnaire, so we are gathering qualitative and quantitative data, and we are currently working on analyzing the results. So soon we will have more news. And well, that's all. Thank you for your attention. And as I said, on the next days, following days, the report that explains in depth this research will be publicly open. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, for this very interesting presentation. And to all, actually, our speaker today was a really insightful event from my point of view, but of course I'm not subjective. I am subjective, I'm not objective. But I wonder if somebody has a question for Carlos. I did write in the chat that too. Please go ahead. I cannot make questions because I really know the report, so it would be really but please go ahead and type something or just turn on the microphone and say something. if you feel like. Otherwise, the report will be actually this afternoon available on the website. That is, I'm going to type it, MCE. Yeah, there is a question from Kevin that I know he wants to speak. Please go ahead, Kevin. At least last time you spoke, so I suppose you want to speak again.
I'm laughing here because I'm taking up so much of your time. I have to apologize.
No, please, no problem.
No, so I work with students on a hybrid model, and I suppose often the issues is ensuring that they've engaged with the content. So we're trying to roll out data analytics to make sure that they've actually, I suppose, not only engaged with the content, but also that they're able to apply it into practice. So we're in a very, I suppose we're looking at teacher training and nursing training, and we're going into business at the moment. So we're looking at how we can actually ensure that they're applying their knowledge. And then that's one of the areas that kind of led into assessment. How can we assess those? So we're looking at like scenario-based assessments, maybe experiential. So I'm just wondering, from the experts we have here, is there any kind of advice on how to refine that process regarding assessment, or ensuring that they are actually meeting the standards that we set, especially when it's a remote? I know we talked about earlier about having the hybrid, where a little bit in person and then online. I'd imagine the in person, where you'd actually see them in practice, where you get to assess them. I suppose it's a bit of a gray area that we're always trying to refine. So I'd appreciate any kind of guidance on that. Thank you so much. And thank you, by the way, to all the speakers. It's been really enjoyable. Fáilte,
Kevin. I might just take that as sort of one of the things that we're trying to always do, and particularly from our perspective, is have that, emphasis on the learning design aspect of the micro-credential, and that it transcends all modalities, Kevin. So we have micro-credentials where it's class, face-to-face, down to pure online asynchronous provision. So looking at the assessment practices has been really important. And we have in our institution a characteristic for micro-credentials that essentially I have to approve the assessment plan for the micro-credential, and that is really so dependent on the subject area, and this goes across now all disciplines in DCU, as you can imagine. So not just the teacher training of the nurses, but we're actually doing some with the nurses as well. So I know the types of things that you're looking into, but really for us, it's that helping the academics to design that authentic, genuine assessment, and also giving them the opportunity to think about it. So what we did was, for some of the assessment areas, we tried to model out what that assessment would look like in a work-based practice situation, particularly for those practice-oriented micro-credentials. And then for other types of micro-credentials where, we'd have an academic rock up and say, oh, we'll just get them to write an essay. We go, okay. But actually, one of the learning outcomes of our micro-credentials is that there has to be a relevancy for work, and that's called out. So we've done a lot of work on trying to get the assessment piece right, but that is, I think, and we're leveraging the work that's happening in the assessment area anyway, about bringing in, so for one of our aviation micro-credentials that we have on stream, we're doing oral assessment, oral-based assessments, where it's a really interesting point of view. So it's really like having a critical debate, and there's a lot of work done in, I think it's the University of New South Wales, on that type of approach. So again, creating the digital artifacts for that, which creating both the digital artifacts and the means by allowing for that to happen both synchronously and asynchronously, has been an interesting project that we've been engaged in. But very, I think your point, and we had a discussion at one of our microcred partner institutions. They had the University of Limerick at work, and they have a lady there who came over, I think it is from Australia, who is now working in, God, I know I'll get the Australian university wrong, but anyway, her particular focus is on assessment in micro-credentials. So you might go and look up the University of Limerick at work seminar, and they had a lady there who spoke particularly, and she's been funded now for the next year and a half, 2 years, to look into assessment into micro-credentials. And I'm sorry, her name just totally goes out of my brain at the minute. Josephine, yeah, thank you, Emma. Josephine.
Oh, fantastic.
So go and look at some of the work that she is doing. But essentially, if you look at any of the assessment pieces, yeah, the University of Melbourne, she was at Deakin, wasn't it? Because I didn't want to say Deakin and she moved into the University of Melbourne. So I think that's if you look though at assessment practices and look at the whole area of assessment, moving in, and that's the authentic assessment is really where you want to get. And we found, and particularly from our own institution point of view, because, you know, academics will say, we've assessed always this way, and why can't we just do it in the okay, that's not the point of it here. So I think principles for assessment in micro-credentials, particularly where there's co-construction, work-based relevancy and all of that, they have to move with the concept of micro-credentials having a specific focus. And that's where I'm sort of like a gatekeeper in DCU, saying, well, actually, the assessment needs to have some sort of relevancy in that context as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Mairéad, for your time, and I will look into that. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you to all. I wonder if there are other questions. Otherwise, we are out of time, guys, even if it's 5 minutes after. But we have to keep in mind that we have promised that we will finish at 3:30. So I wonder if somebody is in need to ask questions or also compliment are welcome. Just speak up. Otherwise, I wonder if the speaker wants to make another remark or something. Otherwise, I look at Stefan if we want to continue with something else, or we consider.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a moment to shamelessly pitch the next webinar week.
Exactly.
Which is on academic integrity in 2030. So it's more of a futuristic event. Will be a bit more hands-on as well, with input from the audience. So yeah, feel free to register. I'll put a link in the chat as well for anybody who's interested. So yeah, but that's from my part.
And as you said in the chat, people that have come late maybe didn't see it, you will find on our SharePoint and also on SlideShare the presentation that has been done today. You will receive an email about it. Otherwise, you can just follow us, hashtag EADTU, also on social media. I think we will post something about it. But follow us anyway, even if you don't want to look for the presentation. So thank you, everybody, and looking forward to meet you again in the next event that will be very soon. Say again the date in which will be, Stefan. Sorry, I am.
It's going to be 13th of December till Friday, 15th of December. So again, 3 days, 3-day sessions. An assessment will also be addressed, so but more in the context of academic integrity of students. So yeah. Have a look at the program, and just put the link in the chat, and everybody's welcome to join. So yeah.
Thank you a lot then, and see you soon.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.